Electronic Sounds Audio. You know you need to watch that YouTube channel.
What's happening, guys? It's Dean from Electronic Sounds. That's right, it's the first tutorial for the Quasimidi Rave-O-Lution 309. You may be asking yourselves, why are you doing these tutorials for such old gear, Dean? Well, the reality is, guys, is that this thing is still an amazing amount of fun to jam with, and they're still readily available on places like eBay, on places like Reverb.com, maybe your local Craigslist, maybe your local pawn shop. So if you've grabbed one of these beauties and you've just got it home, maybe you don't have a manual, maybe you don't feel like looking at the manual, and you want to get something going, we're going to be doing that today. I'm going to show you a really super easy way to get some grooves set up and get started making music with this vintage beast. Come on, guys, let's get into this. This video is specifically aimed at brand new users of the Rave-O-Lution 309. So if you've been a user for quite some time, you're probably not going to find a lot of new information in this video today, just to give you a heads up, guys. The very first thing that we're going to do today, guys, is we're going to go into the system menu of the Rave-O-Lution, and we're going to tell it how we would like the knobs to behave. We're going to go ahead and hit the edit button, and you'll see right off the jump that they'll let you edit the sound or the mix. We're actually going to use these two buttons here and start scrolling through pages of these menus. And this is something that you're going to use all the time, scrolling through pages of menus, and you can select whichever you'd like to, whichever menu you'd like to get into. We're going to scroll over to the page until it says Pads and System, and then we're going to click the F3 button underneath System to choose System. At this point, it will typically be set to the first setting, which is where you can set your system MIDI channel. Here you can adjust the local on and off and some MIDI settings that you'll want to, get into later as you get more in touch with the unit and how you actually want to be using it in your workflow. But what we're concerned about is page 10 of this menu, where it's going to allow us to change these. I think this means I can't really say the word, but it means the knobs, potometers or potimeters, or I'm sure you guys are laughing at me now, sorry. But it gives us three options for how we would like the knobs to respond. We can have the knobs jump to whatever value that, that it would be when we turn the knob. We can have it snap to whatever value that it is originally, and nothing will change until the knob meets that original value. And that, I'll show you exactly how that works in just a second. That's my preferred method. And there's another method which is called relative. I'm not exactly sure how that works. We're going to go ahead and make sure that our knobs are set to the snap mode. And I'm going to show you exactly what that means. Typically, you're going to be loading different patterns up in the Rave-O-Lution and whatnot. And, what these knobs are representing is going to not be, representative of where they're actually at. Let's say I'm, messing with the knobs, I'm tweaking, I'm jamming, right? And then I load another pattern, okay? Well, where those knobs were a second ago isn't where they are now in the new pattern. I hope that makes sense. And so to be able to continuously interact with the knobs without having any really sudden transitions in the sound, like when you touch the knob, you don't want it to just immediately snap to a different value. You want to change this from whatever value it's currently at, and that's what the snap knob allows you, setting allows you to do. So whenever I touch a knob now, it will show me on the screen what the number value is. And see, that's not actually changing. I don't know if you can see that, but it's showing me that the cutoff frequency is set to 19 right now. And you can see I'm moving the knob all over the place, but nothing is changing until I move the knob back down and where it would meet that number 19, and now I'm controlling the number again. And so what that does is on all of these settings, it prevents anything from snapping to a value real quick, which, sounds really odd and not smooth at all when you're live jamming. So definitely step one, in my opinion, is to get those knobs set the way you want them to respond. Next, I think it's kind of important to understand how the Rave-O-Lution is actually laid out. It's laid out so that you can have different songs, and within those songs, they typically, are going to imagine that you're going to have 8 patterns per song. So as you move this, arrows up here, the song and pattern arrows, it's going to change the song number. And then down here on the patterns, you've got 8 pads. It's 8 pads that represent, 8 different patterns. And when you press the pads, it's going to change to the next pattern on the downbeat of the next measure. So by setting up some of these patterns that make sense to go together, and by going back and forth between them and tweaking the knobs in real time, that's how you're going to be jamming and interacting with the RAVEOLUTION. Aw, yeah. Now you may choose to factory reset your RAVEOLUTION and get rid of anything that the previous owner may have put in there, or you may choose to keep it as it is, as you got it from the shop or as you got it from eBay. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go through these patterns and make sure that there's nothing in here that you're really concerned about keeping before you start. We're going to go ahead and just choose a random place to start today. I'm picking song 4, and I'm going to just play the first pattern. Sort of make sure that that's not something that I wouldn't want to overwrite. I don't really think there's anything special there. I'll sort of go through some of the other patterns and make sure that I'm not about to overwrite something that I would want to keep. You'll notice right off the jump that this, sounds pretty dated right off the jump, but we can get it to sound a little bit less dated as we finesse these knobs in just a minute. Anyhow, I'm not really concerned about overriding any of these patterns at this time, so we're going to go ahead and just work with song 4 and pattern number 1 in song 4 for today. It's really difficult to work with direct sound and also talk at the same time and get all of that recorded. So we're not worrying about direct sound right now. The actual sounds that are coming out of the box aren't actually as important as the methods and how you're going to be, setting this stuff up. So that's what we're focusing on right now. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mute all of the tracks except for the kick drum track. And we'll go ahead and just press play. We're going to go ahead and arbitrarily pick a tempo. You can choose any tempo you like. Let's, maybe pick a more relaxed tempo of, say, 125. Right off the jump, you can, start doing some tweaking to the sound that's playing. If you start adjusting the knob that says sound, you can start scrolling through actual different kick drum sounds, right? Let's say that you found a sound that you're interested in. You can turn that level all the way up. You can play around with the decay settings. Maybe a little much there. You can mess around with the attack settings. You can mess around with the tuning. And when the sound is, pleasant to you, you can start messing around and maybe changing some patterns on that. Let's say that you don't want a 4 on the floor kick and maybe you'd like to, have a different, pattern being played by the kick drum. What you'll do is hold shift and then you're going to hit select on the kick drum, and this is going to randomize what it's playing from the inbuilt, what they call motifs, which are basically little MIDI patterns that all of the parts can play. Didn't really seem to make much of a difference right off the jump. So I'm going to do that again. Shift and select. And also maybe start scrolling through some sounds. Maybe get it a little bit louder for you guys. You hear it's playing it. There we go. It's playing a different part now. It's got that little roll in there. Not really my favorite kick drum, but the sounds aren't super important as is the example as to how you're going to do this, guys. So let's say that pattern isn't doing it for you, right? You're going to hit shift and select, and on the next downbeat, it's going to change what pattern this kick drum is playing. That one has more of like a 4-bar kick pattern. So again, I could start scrolling for a different kick sound now. Maybe find something that's a little bit less distorted and a little bit more my style. There we go, kind of an old school kick sound in there. Kind of mess with that. Maybe just a little bit. Let's see if that's checking the volume on the camera. Make sure it's not too loud for you guys at home. What we can do now, guys, is we can just unmute the next track if we want. Bring the level on that one down just a touch. Actually, I kind of like what that's doing right now. Let's just leave that for now, and we'll unmute the next track, which is the hi-hats. Okay, now you could change the sound on those. Scroll through, some other presets for hi-hats. You can adjust the decay on those maybe and shorten them up if you wanted. You know, we could adjust the tuning on these to anything we like. That might be alright for now. We can go ahead and unmute the percussion. Now, before we get involved in the percussion is a little bit different than the other, you know, sound generators here, guys, in the fact that the kick is basically going to be one sound, and the snare is, you know, for the most part, going to be one sound. The hats are sometimes going to be an open and a closed, per se, and you can get more in depth in that sort of stuff in the manual, but the percussion is actually a set of sounds, meaning spread out across the, you know, the MIDI note values, rather. Like, say there'll be a different sound on a C and a different sound on a D and a different sound on an E, etc. So the percussion sets actually have quite a few different sounds in there. You sometimes don't get the same immediate results doing the randomizing on those, and you may need to get a little bit deeper in the menu to get some really awesome results, per se, out of the percussion. Let's see what happens if we just start randomizing that. I'm gonna unmute that. Now, I also like to note that some of the updates to this, like the drum expansion and the synth expansion, add new sounds and new capabilities to the unit. And so some of the expansions allow you to have melodic samples in the, not like you can't import your own, but they're in there is what I mean. So that you can actually get really deep and detailed and make some melodic patterns using the percussion track as well. We're not really worried about that today, so I'm just going to continue scrolling through sounds. Maybe we're off the jump, we'll hit shift and select and randomize what that's going to play. The thing with these built-in motifs is that they kind of have a really 1998 feel to them, and often you'll need to shift and select quite a few times before you get one that's not quite so dated sounding. That's a little bit interesting right there. Maybe we'll go with that for now, just for the tutorial's sake. Maybe mix that down just a little bit. Cool. So now we've got ourselves a groove that's, you know, quite a bit different than what we started with. Let's go ahead and unmute the bass lead synthesizer and see what we can get on that. You can change the sound that it's playing down here at the bottom by scrolling this one. Kind of like that. Tweak that resonance and then maybe see what happens when you move the cutoff. Kind of a nice range of movement on the filter there. You can also keep the sound presets the same and actually scroll what waves, what waveform is being used to generate the sound. So you've got quite a bit of customizing options in the bass lead synthesizer just by moving the combination of the sound preset and then the waveform that it's playing inside of that preset. Let's say we want to stick with that square wave, right? Cool. Let's say that we're really happy with this pattern and, and we'd like to create this into a live jam. Let's go ahead and save this. And what we'll do is over here, we're going to click the right button, and off the jump, it's going to give us a weird one. It's going to say store the percussion. Well, I haven't really done a lot of changes to the percussion, so we don't really need to worry about that. But we're going to go back to our page menu, and we definitely want to store the pattern. So we'll click OK, and we're going to store it to pattern 25, which is, the default that it's on right now. Okay, and then we'll exit out of the menu. So now if I go to, say, a different pattern, and I can go back to our pattern 1, it's going to still be there. Now let me show you a neat trick we can do with this right off the jump, guys. If you've seen any of the modern tutorials for the Digitakt products, like maybe from Cuckoo or whatnot, you might have seen that there's a feature to where a pattern can be saved, and then you can do a whole bunch of tweaking on the knobs and get that pattern into a completely different state than it was originally. But then with the press of one knob, Cuckoo will get everything back to where it was originally. And believe it or not, you can do that exact same thing with the Rave-O-Lution. If you've got a pattern playing and you tweak the knobs and set them to any other settings, the second that you hit that pattern button again on the downbeat of the next measure, it just reloads that pattern and you're good to go. Now sometimes the volumes can get a little bit screwy in these sounds, and maybe there's a kick drum that's really loud, or maybe there's a snare drum that's really loud. That kind of prevents a little bit of the, just instant tweaking when you're really wanting things to sound smooth, and you'll need to kind of get a feel for that on your own. But let's sort of check that out, what I'm talking about, guys. Again, sorry about no direct sound at this time. We're going to get some direct sound going later in this video. But let's say we've got this pattern playing, right? And we're jamming, maybe we're playing some synthesizers, right? And we want to get some variation here. So you can just sort of be counting in your head, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And when you're getting, to the point where you might like to do a turnaround, you might just grab all of these sound knobs and tweak them to a different sound real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, and then load the pattern again. Let me do that without talking over it so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3. And then we reload. So just do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3. So that's kind of a neat thing as you're jamming. Is that you can easily and immediately just get it right back to where you had it originally. Okay, so say that you're really happy with the pattern we've created, right? And you want to start building that into a more fleshed out jam with some more patterns and some more components. Let's go ahead and check into that. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and go into the right menu again, and we're going to store our pattern, but we're going to store our pattern to the next slot over. So I'll use the dial, I'll choose the next pattern over, and we'll choose OK. And now we can exit out. And now both of these patterns are the same. So what we'll do is we'll just make some alterations on the second pattern. Maybe we'll, let's see here. Maybe we'll pick some different variations as to what the parts are playing, right? Maybe we can sort of mute a few of these and hone in on these hi-hats, and we'll hit Shift and Select. Now those hi-hats are doing a different part, and let's see here. Let's go ahead and unmute this kick drum, and let's go ahead and hit Shift and Select on the snare drum. Sounds like it's pretty much playing a mute there. Nope, it's doing something. Hold on, let's hear that again. Let me get this back. Just a really interesting kind of in and out part. Let's go ahead and keep that for now. And let's bring the percussions back. Now, I would suggest that as you're building your jams and your grooves, that you don't necessarily change every single pattern on every single part, on every single, pattern variation. You want to keep some congruency in some of these parts so that, the jam sounds a little bit, smooth and congruent when you're actually jamming it. Let's unmute the synth here and see if we can't get it to play something else for this part. Bring the cutoff up so we can hear that a little bit better. Let's go Shift and Select. Let's say that works for us, right? So let's go ahead, and at this point we're going to save it into the second slot so we can go back and forth, and the second one will remain different how we've got it set. We're going to go ahead and hit right and store pattern, and it's going to by default choose the one that you're on, and there we go, we've saved it. So now if I'm playing pattern 1 and we're jamming along, and maybe I'm messing with the sounds, whatever, hey, and it's time to change to a new pattern, you can go back and forth, and 1, 2, click that button. And 1, 2, click that button. And now we're going back and forth between these two. You can very easily continue this sort of idea by hitting right again, okay? And you can click store pattern, okay? But maybe you want to store this to the next one, right? So we go okay, and we exit out. And now we have an original pattern, a second pattern, and our second pattern is copied again to the third slot. At which point we could go in and maybe change some stuff again. Maybe we choose a different kick drum. Maybe I hit shift and select on that kick drum. If we mute some of this stuff. And here the kick is doing something different now than just a straight 4 on the floor pattern. These instrument channels have about 100 motifs, as they call them, built in, which is basically, 100 kick patterns, 100 snare patterns, 100 different hat patterns, etc. So you can really get a lot of variation if you're patient and you sit here and you mess with this. Shift and select on the hi-hats, right? Cool, let's say we're into that, right? Maybe make some adjustments. We can tune those hats maybe, right? Cool, right? Maybe bring them down in the mix a little bit. This is where, all of your choices are going to make a difference and, help shape your sound. Let's go ahead and unmute this snare drum, right? Maybe we'll go ahead and change sounds at this point. And maybe we'll hit shift and select again to choose a different motif, which is playing back. Cool, let's say we're happy with that, right? And let's unmute the percussion. Let's say we want to maybe try a different percussion kit of sounds this time. So we'll maybe just scroll the sound knob and pick something different. Cool, there's some percussion in the mix, right? Now, let's keep in mind that, if as you get more familiar with this, unit, and you get in and start learning how to actually program the sounds, this percussion track is a really powerful track with multiple sounds spread out across, the MIDI notes, so that you don't have such a limited palette. It's not really just 1 sound, 2 sound, 3 sound, 4 sound. It's really 1 sound, 2 sound, 3 sound, and then like 10 more sounds here, if you follow what I'm saying. Let's unmute this again. Let's say maybe we want to choose to a different actual sound preset this time, but leave the pattern playing the same. Let's say that's what we're happy with, right? We can tweak that. Cool, let's say we're totally into that, right? So now we just save that into the third slot. We go right, store pattern, okay, store to pattern 27. It's always going to try to default it to the one you're on. Okay, cool. Now we can exit out of there. And now we've just built 3 patterns that go with each other. We can start with our first pattern, right? Do some jamming, hey, da-da-da, whatever. And then now we're off into another direction. We're tweaking stuff, right? Yay, and then we go into the next pattern. And basically, you're just going to keep repeating that until you've got all 8 patterns, filled up. And then boom, within, 10, 15 minutes of turning something like this on for the first time and using this sort of technique, you've already got just a few patterns that you can go back and forth and tweak the knobs in real time and not worry about, destroying anything that you've created down here. Because no matter how much you move the knobs up here and no matter how much you change the sounds, as soon as you press the pattern again, it just reloads that and you're back into square one. So as you're tweaking, if you get into a state where you're like, oh, this is just magic right here, you just stop, and you click the right and you'll just write that into the next empty pattern. Then maybe you'll load that pattern and you'll tweak with that for a while. And when you find that magic spot, you'll stop and you'll write that to the next pattern. And you just go back and forth between the patterns. This is the whole, point of live jamming for me. I'll start adding other elements, outside of this box once I've got something, set up. This is a super quick and a super easy way to get started with this. You don't even need to worry about learning how to program it right off the jump because it is a little intimidating inside of this. And you don't need to worry about the special loop tracks right off the jump. Those might feel a little odd. You've got your volume. You've got this overblast setting here, which basically turns up, a global fuzzy nasty distortion on the whole thing. I usually leave this to about 9 o'clock, any more than that, and it seems to get a little bit too distorted and fuzzy for my personal taste. But if you're into that distorted techno sound, by all means, crank that overblast up. What I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to switch over to direct sound where I'm not going to be talking, but you're going to hear the box really clearly, and I'm going to see if I can't set up a few pattern examples where you can get a better idea of the sounds that come out of this beauty. So that took less than 5 minutes of just messing around with it, and I was able to coax out an original groove that I'm really happy with. That sounds a lot better than some of the things that are in this by default, some of those retro patterns. You gotta just get in there and tweak those knobs and keep moving the sounds until something really starts jumping out at you and, gelling together. One of the things that you'll probably want to do is turn the reverb down on some of these sounds right off the jump. Let me give you an example. Here we are playing a groove with some hats that are a little bit over the top. Now you may be going for that kind of a sound, and that's fine if you are, but if you're not, some of the ways you can tame the hats in a Rave-O-Lution like this would be to bring the decay down. One of the things that, that makes this so special is the ability to do all this in real time. Let's say that you're not happy with this, that even when they're closed down, you still find that the amount of reverb that's coming through on those hats is a little bit excessive. So you can see how you can select each track by pressing the select button at the bottom of that track, and that means that whatever track selected is going to be the track that you're affecting down here in the bottom section. So if we want to get to those hi-hats and turn the reverb down on those, we're just going to go to Edit. By default, it's going to be the options of sound and mix. We can start scrolling through pages. We don't need that. We just need to have the sound we want selected, and we click Mix. Now it's going to default us to page 1 here, and we can scroll through all sorts of pages to get, different, settings on here. We can actually scroll through the individual sounds via the menu in here as well, instead of doing it with this large knob over here. We can scroll over and we can adjust the level and the mix as well. We can adjust the panning on all of the sounds. And here we have the effects 1 send, which is that dramatic reverb. We'll go ahead and play this while I adjust that. You can get it quite a bit more seated in the mix by bringing some of that old school reverb down. By default, it sort of washes everything in that old school reverb, which you might want it for some of your tracks and for some, specific vibes that you're going for, but quite often you're going to want to go into that menu and tame that. So let's say that the snare drum has too much reverb on it, right? You're just going to select the snare drum, you're going to hit Edit, okay, you're going to hit Mix, and it'll tell you, edit the mix of the track, snare, You could select any track you want while in here, the kick, the snare, the hi-hats, the percussion, etc., right? So if we want the snare drum, okay, there it is, effects in number 1. We could turn this way up if we wanted to. We could, scroll over, rather, and select the kick drum. You can see that there's nothing being sent, to effects in 1. We certainly don't want to have reverb on our kick drum, but if you wanted that, that's where you would do it. No worries. All you have to do is just go into the menu and make sure that the track that you want to be messing with is what is selected down at the bottom. And you can either mess with the sound of that, or you can mess with the mix of that. You can start getting into the pattern stuff. You can start getting into these effects menus and changing which actual effects algorithms you're sending the sounds to. You can get in there and adjust an EQ for each sound. The more you get involved and the more you start, customizing the sounds and the way that the box responds, the more that you're going to get what you want out of this guy. I hope that you guys have found this useful, and until next time, thanks for watching.